March 4th, 1923, 15 miles east of Manchester, rests the market town of Glossop, Derbyshire, in England. It's 11 a.m., back Kershaw Street on a Sunday morning, and 4-year-old Tommy Wood fails to turn up for dinner at his grandmother's house. It wasn't long before neighbors and other volunteers were out searching for the missing child. Stories began to circulate that Tommy Wood had been seen walking with 2 other boys around 5 p.m. on Slateland's Road, leading police to speculate that the boy may have fallen into the Turnley Brook. But a bloodhound, search teams, and efforts made dragging the Turnley and Glossop Brooks would turn up nothing. Inspector John Ellis Chadwick would receive a statement from Tommy Wood's neighbor, Albert Edward Burrows, which indicated that Burrows had seen the 4-year-old at the bottom of Slateland's Road with 2 older boys. Albert asked Tommy to come home with him, but the child declined. The statement also contained details about a purse Tommy had, which the other boys tossed into some hen pens, and a whip. The purse would be found in the hen pens, while the whip was located searching the Turnley Brook. Chadwick noticed the whip had been attached to a stone to keep it from being carried off. This convinced Chadwick that the whip was likely planted. On a nearby bank, a rubber boot print would also be discovered. It would later be ascertained that Burrows had borrowed a pair from a neighbor. Monday the 12th, and Albert Burrows is again being interviewed by law enforcement. A female witness had stated that she had seen a man and a small boy maneuvering over shale heaps near Coal Pit House on Sunday, March 4th, while a farm worker had also spotted and spoken with Burrows at Bridgefields at 11:30 a.m. the same day he was with the boy. Burrows would offer up another statement claiming that at 11 a.m. Sunday, March 4th, he and Tommy walked together through the fields to Simondley. While near an area known as Hargate Hill, Burrows asserted that the boy went missing while waiting in a hollow, as Burrows had wandered off to supposedly catch a rabbit. After being unable to locate the child, Burrows returned to Glossop. This led police to search an unused air shaft on the road from Simondley to Charlesworth. The vertical air shafts were constructed to provide ventilation for coal mining. Grappling irons were used, but the shaft was over 100 feet deep and contained 5 to 9 feet of water. After ropes broke and the irons fell to the bottom, work was suspended for the day. There was an outlet for the water into old workings, but unlikely that the flow was strong enough to carry away a body. It also seemed to Inspector Chadwick that although Burrows had been helpful, he also seemed to be sending investigators down the wrong paths. The planting of the whip, the story about seeing Tommy later in the day, and Burrows' claim that the child could not have crossed High Lane. While out interviewing at Hargate Hill, Chadwick passed by an air shaft of the Dinting Pit on the opposite side of the road from the other shaft. The shaft was surrounded by a stone wall that appeared to have been recently disturbed. On Tuesday, the police returned to search the other air shaft, while Chadwick ordered other officers to keep a close eye on Albert Burrows. While police were searching, Burrows appeared walking up Simondley New Lane and engaged some other men in conversation. When the men told Burrows that the other shaft was being searched, he became visibly upset. Instead of continuing up the lane, Burrows would cut through a field and observe the officers' search from a hiding place. Wooden platforms were laid out over the top of the air shaft, and the grappling irons were lowered down. Eventually, the body of Tommy Wood was raised to the surface and brought to the police station mortuary. The search had garnered a great deal of attention from locals who had gathered to observe. Chadwick, aware that Burrows was watching, instructed other officers to go and arrest him. The angry crowd of onlookers, however, took it upon themselves to pursue the murder suspect and desperately chased him up the moor towards Chunnel. Burrows was eventually apprehended in a field known as Garside's Intake in Harrod Clough. He was found hiding under a holly bush by the gang of civilians and turned into Detective Sergeant Wilson. Burrows pleaded for mercy, but was reminded by the crowd that he had shown none to little Tommy Wood. Police struggled before eventually prying Burrows loose from the angry mob, who were doing their best to hang Burrows from an oak tree with a scarf. Burrows was transported to the police station on the back of an open lorry belonging to the sanitation department, the scarf still attached around his neck. Through the streets they passed scores of fiery civilians who hissed and booed Burrows, who in turn fired back, yelling to the people, "I shan't tremble on the scaffold like Charlie Peace." The hordes of people grew so thick that Burrows and the police had to force their way through as a barrage of debris was thrown by the enraged masses. Once inside the police station, Chadwick sat down with Albert Edward Burrows and asked the suspected murderer of Tommy Wood how Hannah Calladine was doing. 1918, 62-year-old farm laborer Albert Burrows began a sexual relationship with 28-year-old Hannah Calladine, despite already being married. Burrows, who was born in Cheadle-Hulme in 1871, had a criminal record for horse stealing, larceny, and assault and cruelty to animals. By 1914, he was living on Back Kershaw Street with his wife and daughter. During World War I, while employed at an ammunition factory, Albert would meet Hannah Calladine. Already the mother of a 4-year-old girl, Hannah would become impregnated by Albert Burrows, having a son by the same name. Burrows would bigamously marry Hannah, telling her that he was a widower, all the while providing money to both families. He would be imprisoned for the bigamous marriage and had a child maintenance order made against him, serving a 6-month sentence in Walton Prison. Burrows would also serve a 21-day sentence in Shrewsbury Prison after Hannah took out an affiliation order against him, which he could not pay. Burrows, however, kept in touch with Hannah when he was in prison, and eventually would be released. On December 19, 1919, Burrows would attempt moving Hannah into his home in Glossop, causing his actual wife to become understandably angry and leave Burrows. She would claim maintenance, driving him into even deeper financial turmoil. Hannah, her illegitimate daughter Elsie Large, and young Albert would stay for 3 weeks. Albert Burrows owed maintenance to 2 different women and was behind on rent, and failure to pay the child maintenance would eventually put him behind bars once again. But Albert Edward Burrows had a plan in mind, one that would involve murder. On January 11th, 1920, Burrows would take Hannah and their son on an outing at Simondley Moor, where he would murder them, disposing of their bodies in the old air shaft. The following day, he brought Hannah's daughter to the same location and killed her, using the same disused air shaft as a makeshift tomb. After reconciling with his wife, Burrows would carry on for the next 3 years, writing Hannah's mother to pretend she was still alive. It took several days to convince his wife to come back, but he assured her Hannah was gone and had found a job in Seymour Meads in Stretford Road. On the day after Hannah and her son were last seen, Burrows was spotted walking down Holland Cross Lane at 6 o'clock in the morning with Elsie Large. When seen hours later, he was alone. When asked about the whereabouts of Elsie, Burrows notoriously stated, "Yes, I was taking Elsie to her mother." "Why, where has she gone?" the person asked. "I am not telling anyone. We have made it up not to let anyone know. We are keeping it a secret." It's no wonder when asked about Hannah Calladine, Albert Burrows became unnerved and shaken by the question. Burrows told Chadwick that he kept in contact with Hannah, but Chadwick found this unlikely and decided to make inquiries into Hannah and her children's whereabouts. At an inquest, Burrows would try to claim that the boy had accidentally fallen into the upper shaft and had been carried out by the water. The funeral of Tommy Wood would take place on March 17th at the town hall the following week. The pathologist gave evidence that the boy had been sexually abused. This revelation understandably raised public anger exponentially. Burrows was sent to Derby for trial on the charge of murder. Public outrage was high, and publicity about the case ran rampant. Pressmen and sightseers crowded the crime scene, even throwing stones down into the air shaft, which would create problems for investigators later on. Burrows was set to appear at Derbyshire Assizes in July, and Inspector Chadwick needed to find out what happened to Hannah Calladine and her children. Chadwick was able to locate Hannah's sister and learned more suspicious things about Albert Burrows, that she had received letters from Burrows since the disappearance, but nothing from Hannah. Also that inquiries into Seymour Meads revealed that Hannah had never been employed there, and that Hannah's parents had once arrived at Glossop to see their daughter, but Burrows told them he had given Hannah money to take the children to New Brighton and then walked the couple back to the train station. On the 7th of May, police returned to the air shaft and, with a rope and winch, bailed out water by means of a metal pail, with the previously and thoughtlessly thrown rocks also needing to be raised. Due to heavy rainfall, a steam pump needed to be installed in the shaft just above the level of the water and connected to the town's old steam fire engine at the top of the pipes. Progress was made, and on the 21st of May, amid some corrugated iron sheets and other debris, the remains of Hannah Calladine and her 2 children were found. Among the most ghastly of the findings would be a child's clog with foot bones protruding from it. Hannah would be identified because of an abnormality in her eye tooth. Hannah's sister would be able to identify other items of clothing, and a Nantwich clogger was able to attest that the child's clogs were made by him. There was no doubt who the deceased were. The trial of Albert Edward Burrows was held at Derbyshire Assizes on July 8, 1923. Burrows would be found guilty of the murder of Hannah Calladine and her 15-month-old son Albert before Mr. Justice Shearman, but would not be tried for the killings of Elsie Large and Tommy Wood. Among the counsel for the prosecution, third in order of precedence, was Mr. Norman Burkitt, later a famous Lord Chief Justice. The defense that Hannah had committed suicide and murdered her baby by jumping down the air shaft was not believable. The jury took less than a quarter of an hour to bring back a verdict of guilty. Albert Burrows was hanged at Bagthorpe Jail in Nottingham on August 8, 1923 at 8 a.m. After 3 years of decomposition, the bodies of Hannah and her children were in such a condition that the cause of death could not be determined, but it is believed that strangulation was likely the method used. Hannah Calladine and her children were buried at Glossop Cemetery, the grave marked with a wooden cross. Albert Burrows was a deceptive predator, projecting the image of a hard-working family man while internally harboring sadistic fantasies. His motives for killing Hannah and her children were practical for Burrows. They were financial, but he was also a pedophile whose motives for killing Tommy Wood were sexually driven, as he had abused this victim before throwing the child 100 feet down the air shaft to drown. Burrows's wife Clementine and daughter Ellen were not free from his tendencies either, as young Ellen had once been placed in care due to her father's incestuous behavior. Burrows, who had claimed all along to be 62, was in fact 10 years younger, a claim made likely in an effort to convince others he was physically incapable of sexual assault. Albert Burrows was a large, somewhat imposing man who seemed to feel most comfortable in the company of children, as he would commonly be seen walking with small children through town and through local fields. People in Glossop must have assumed he was harmless, albeit somewhat simplistic, but Albert Burrows was quietly brooding, an all too normal-looking laborer with the soul of a savage killer. Perhaps it is worth mentioning again the sense of sheer hysteria that had come over the public during this period, as angry hordes turned out at every opportunity to spit rage-filled vitriol toward the killer. The site of the air shaft was disappointingly the place of much vandalism, as crime fanatics loitered at the scene and, most disturbingly, removed rocks from the stone wall surrounding the air shaft and sent them hurtling unknowingly down onto the bodies of Hannah Calladine and her children. Born in 1871, Burrows worked mainly on farms and railways, but seldom stayed at one job for too long. It would be revealed that Albert Edward Burrows had been developing his notoriety even before the gruesome murders, as he had been convicted of a variety of sexual offenses against both boys and girls, and had spent several terms in prison. In the end, the publicity over the crime would die down, but the memory of 3 innocent children and Hannah Calladine, left in an old abandoned air shaft, would never be forgotten. It is also worth noting that the efforts of Chadwick and the other investigators were truly Herculean, and many other people in Glossop also came together with police to assist in the grueling task of searching the air shaft, working long hours and braving hazardous conditions as well as unfavorable weather. Now, at Simondley Pit, the air shaft still remains, but the wall that once surrounded it has disappeared over time, and the ghosts of a heinous and tragic crime never completely fade.